In the vast expanse of the Galactic Federation, where ancient races wielded technology beyond imagination and commanded respect through millennia of achievement, humans were nothing more than a cosmic joke. The newest species to stumble into interstellar society, these bipedal creatures from a backwater planet called Earth were seen as primitive scavengers who somehow managed to jury-rig their way off their own world. The Drachmarie Empire, proud descendants of actual dragons who had evolved beyond their physical forms into beings of pure energy and crystal, found human attempts at engineering particularly amusing. Their living starships, massive dragon-like creatures bred over thousands of years, with a pinnacle of biotechnology far beyond anything these clever monkeys could ever hope to understand. But in a universe where pride comes before the fall, the Drachmarie were about to learn that sometimes the most powerful force isn't ancient wisdom or superior technology. It's a human with a wrench, some duct tape, and absolutely no respect for the phrase, "That's impossible." What happens when an empire's greatest weapon breaks down in the middle of nowhere, and the only help available comes from the very species they've spent decades mocking? The Drachmarie are about to discover that humans don't just fix things, they make them better, whether you want them to or not. This is the story of how one human mechanic turned an empire's worldview upside down, one impossible repair at a time. The massive bioship Zelthera drifted helplessly through the void between star systems, its once majestic dragon-like form now convulsing in obvious distress. What should have been a routine patrol mission for the Drachmarie Empire had become a nightmare scenario that High Commander Vexthera had never anticipated in his 3 centuries of service. The living starship, a magnificent creature spanning nearly 2 kilometers from nose to tail, had been bred specifically for long-range reconnaissance missions. Its crystalline scales, normally a brilliant emerald that could shift to match the cosmic background, now flickered erratically between sickly yellow and deep purple. The ship's breathing, the rhythmic expansion and contraction that provided both propulsion and life support, had become increasingly labored over the past few hours. Vexthera stood in the ship's neural command center, a vast chamber lined with organic interfaces that directly connected to Zelthera's nervous system. His tall, elegant form, typical of the evolved Drachmarie, showed none of the physical characteristics of his species' ancient dragon ancestors, but his pride in their heritage burned as fiercely as any flame his forebears might have breathed. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked him as nobility within the Empire. Subcommander HFY approached, her crystal blue skin pale with worry. "The bioneural networks are experiencing cascading failures, High Commander. Our best biotechnicians are baffled. Zelthera's cellular repair systems seem to be attacking themselves rather than maintaining the ship's integrity." Vexthera's long fingers danced over the living console, feeling the ship's pain through the neural interface. The sensation made him grimace. In all his years serving aboard bioships, he had never experienced anything like this. The creature's suffering was palpable, and, worse yet, it was spreading to non-critical systems. "Have we identified the source of the malfunction?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would not be satisfying. "Negative, sir. The corruption began in the primary metabolic chambers and has spread to the propulsion organs. If we cannot stop the progression, Zelthera will." HFY paused, unable to voice the unthinkable. "We'll die," Vexthera finished grimly. The loss of a bioship was not merely the destruction of military equipment. It was the death of a sentient being that had served the Empire faithfully. More pragmatically, it would also mean the deaths of everyone aboard, as the ship's life support systems were integrated into its biology. A younger officer approached hesitantly. "High Commander, long-range sensors have detected a vessel approaching our position. It appears to be human." The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Humans, the galactic community's newest and most pitted members. They had achieved faster-than-light travel barely 50 years ago, using what other species charitably called aggressive improvisation, and what the Drachmarie termed dangerous stupidity. Their ships were crude collections of metal and circuits held together by welds and wishful thinking. A human vessel? Vexthara's voice carried a mix of disbelief and disdain. In this sector? What could they possibly be doing so far from their pathetic little worlds? Unknown, sir. They're broadcasting on standard emergency frequencies, offering assistance. A bitter laugh escaped Vexthara's throat. Assistance? From humans? What could those primitive scavengers possibly offer that our own experts cannot provide? He gestured to the dozens of Drachmarie biotechnicians working frantically at their stations, their advanced knowledge representing thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. Another shudder ran through Zelthara, this one strong enough to send several officers stumbling. The ship's pain echoed through the neural links, and Vexthara felt his own body responding to the creature's distress. Time was running out. Sir, HFY ventured carefully. Regulations do require us to acknowledge any offer of assistance during emergency situations. Regulations written by bureaucrats who never had to endure the embarrassment of accepting help from inferior species, Vexthara muttered. But even as he spoke, another wave of Zelthara's agony washed over him. The bioship was dying, and his pride wouldn't save either the creature or his crew. The human vessel was now visible on the main display, a battered cargo hauler that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. Compared to Zelthara's elegant, organic curves, it was an insult to the very concept of spaceflight. Yet it moved with surprising grace, its approach vector showing a pilot's skill that Vexthara grudgingly had to respect. Incoming transmission from the human vessel, reported the communications officer. Put it through, Vexthara said, steeling himself for what he expected would be broken galactic standard and primitive thinking. The transmission crackled to life, and a voice, decidedly female and carrying an accent that suggested one of humanity's outer colonies, filled the command center. Drachmarie vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chun aboard the freighter Lucky Strike. We're reading some pretty serious distress patterns from your bioship. Our sensors show massive systemic failures in what looks like your metabolic conversion systems. We'd like to offer assistance. Vexthara exchanged glances with his officers. The human had correctly identified not only that they were dealing with a bioship, but had also pinpointed the general area of the malfunction. That was unexpected. Human vessel, he replied, his tone carefully neutral. We appreciate your offer. However, this situation requires specialized knowledge of Drachmarie biotechnology that would be beyond your species' current understanding. There was a pause, then what sounded suspiciously like a chuckle came through the transmission. With respect, Commander, I've been working on bioships for the better part of 15 years. Started as a mechanic on one of the joint colony worlds where your people let us tinker with some of your older vessels. I've probably spent more time elbow-deep in bioship guts than most of your crew has spent thinking about them. The casual way the human referred to the sacred bioships as having guts made several officers wince. Yet there had been something in the woman's voice, a confidence that spoke of genuine experience rather than boastful ignorance. Another massive convulsion shook Zelthara, and this time the lights throughout the ship flickered. Emergency alarms began sounding as non-essential systems started shutting down to preserve the creature's failing life functions. High Commander, HFY said urgently, cellular breakdown has accelerated. We have perhaps 2 hours before complete system failure. Vexthara closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Every instinct, every fiber of his Drachmarie pride rebelled against the idea of accepting help from human. But his duty was to his ship and crew, not his ego. Captain Chun, he said finally, you may approach and dock with our vessel. However, I want it understood that any modifications to our ship systems must be approved by our biotechnicians. Understood, Commander. Just so you know, I'm bringing my assistant with me. Fair warning, he's not much for social niceties, but he's the best bioneural specialist I've ever worked with. Very well. Docking Bay 7 is available for your use. As the transmission ended, Vexthara turned to address his officers. I want a full security detail standing by. And someone find me everything we have on human engineering capabilities. If we're going to trust our ship to these mechanics, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. Through the ship's neural network, he could feel Zelthra's confusion and pain. The bioship didn't understand what was happening to its body, couldn't comprehend why its own systems were turning against it. All it knew was that it was dying, and that knowledge filled every corner of the vast creature's consciousness with fear. "Hold on, old friend," Vextera whispered, placing his hand on the living console. "Help is coming, even if it's not the kind we would have chosen." Outside, the human freighter maneuvered toward the docking bay with a precision that belied its ramshackle appearance. Whatever else could be said about humans, they certainly knew how to fly their crude machines. 20 minutes later, the docking bay's atmospheric seals cycled, and Vextera found himself face-to-face with humanity for the first time in his career. Captain Chun was shorter than he had expected. Most humans were compared to Drachmarie, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that looked like they had seen better days. Her companion was even more unremarkable, a thin man with prematurely gray hair and intense brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Permission to come aboard, Commander," Chun said formally, though she was already stepping through the airlock with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Granted," Vextera replied, studying the two humans with barely concealed curiosity. "I am High Commander Vextera. This is my ship, Zelthra. Pleasure to meet you," Chun said, then gestured to her companion. "This is Marcus Webb. He specializes in bioneural networks." Webb had been looking around the docking bay with obvious interest, his eyes taking in the organic curves and living materials that formed the ship's structure. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried an odd intensity. "Beautiful work," he murmured, running his hand along one of the walls. "Early fourth-generation breeding, if I'm not mistaken. The cellular density is remarkable. How old is she?" The casual familiarity with which the human assessed Zelthra caught Vextera off guard. She is 63 years old. "How did you know about the breeding generations?" Webb glanced at him with what might have been surprise. "It's pretty obvious once you know what to look for. The scale patterns, the neural pathway distribution, the way the bioluminescent cells are organized. Your people do excellent work, by the way. This is some of the most sophisticated biotechnology I've ever seen." Despite himself, Vextera felt a small surge of pride at the compliment. Then, he remembered who was giving it. "Captain Chun, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, I must remind you that this is a highly sophisticated organism, not a machine to be repaired with hammers and welding torches." Chin's response was a grin that somehow managed to be both friendly and slightly predatory. "Commander, if there's one thing I've learned in 15 years of keeping ships running, it's that everything breaks eventually. And everything that breaks can be fixed if you're willing to get creative enough." A subtle tremor ran through the deck, and Webb's head snapped up like a hunting dog catching a scent. "That's not good," he said quietly. "The tremor frequency suggests neurological cascade failure." "How long has this been going on?" "Approximately 6 hours, KYTH-RAX answered. "Our biotechnicians believe it began with metabolic dysfunction." Webb was already moving toward the inner ship, following what seemed to be an instinctive understanding of the bioship's layout. "Can you show me to the primary neural nexus? And I'll need access to the metabolic chambers." As they made their way through Zelthra's corridors, Vextera couldn't help but notice how the two humans interacted with the ship. Where his own crew moved with a respectful distance due to a superior life form, Chun and Webb touched the walls casually, leaned against supports without ceremony, and generally treated the magnificent creature like a ship that needed fixing. It should have been insulting. Instead, there was something oddly reassuring about their matter-of-fact approach. They reached the Neural Command Center just as another wave of distress pulsed through the ship's systems. The main displays were now flashing urgent warnings in the flowing Drachmarie script, and several biotechnicians looked up hopefully as the party entered. Webb took one look at the readings and whistled softly. "Oh, that's not cascade failure. That's autoimmune rejection." "Impossible," said Chief Biotechnician Zarvek, an elder Drachmary whose expertise was legendary. Bioships cannot develop autoimmune responses. It is bred out of them. Bred out. Yes, Webb agreed, moving to one of the monitoring stations and studying the readouts with obvious comprehension. But not eliminated entirely. Under the right circumstances, dormant immune responses can reactivate. He turned to address the room, and Vexthera was struck by the transformation that had come over the quiet human. Where before Webb had seemed almost timid, now he radiated competent authority. What you're seeing isn't system failure. It's the biological equivalent of an allergic reaction. Something has triggered Zelthera's latent immune system, and now she's attacking her own tissues because she can't identify what's making her sick. And you believe you can treat this? Vexthera asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Webb's answer was a slight smile that reminded the High Commander uncomfortably of the expression Drachmary showed just before they delivered devastating news to an enemy. Commander, I don't just think I can treat it. I think I can cure it permanently and make sure it never happens again. But I'm going to need to do some things that your biotechnicians are probably going to find unconventional. Webb's words hung in the air like a challenge, and Vexthera felt every Drachmary in the room tense with anticipation and concern. The idea that this human, this representative of a species that had barely mastered space travel, could solve a problem that had baffled their finest biotechnicians was almost too absurd to consider. Yet Zelthera's continued deterioration made dismissing any potential solution impossible. What exactly do you mean by unconventional? Chief Biotechnician Zarvek asked, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone who suspected they were about to hear something that would offend their sensibilities. Webb moved to the central monitoring station, his hands dancing over the bioluminescent controls with surprising familiarity. The readings that appeared made several Drachmary officers step back in alarm. Internal scans were considered deeply invasive, equivalent to performing surgery without the patient's consent. Hey now, Chen interjected, noticing the reaction. Marcus isn't trying to hurt her. He just needs to see what's going on inside. The scans are necessary, Webb said, his attention focused on the scrolling data. Look at these cellular activity patterns. See how the immune responses are clustered around the metabolic conversion chambers? That's not random distribution. Something specific triggered this reaction. Vexthera studied the displays, tried to interpret what the human was seeing. The patterns were indeed unusual, but he couldn't understand what conclusion Webb was drawing from them. High Commander, Subcommander Kythrax approached quietly. Perhaps we should contact Imperial Biotechnology Command. Surely they would have protocols for this situation. Protocols that would take 18 hours to implement, Webb said without looking up from his scans. Your ship doesn't have 18 hours. Hell, from what I'm seeing here, she might not have two. As if summoned by his words, Zelthera convulsed again, this time violently enough to throw several officers off their feet. Emergency lighting bathed the command center in ominous red, and the ship's life support systems began cycling to backup power. The neural pathways are degrading faster than expected, Zarvek reported, his usual composure cracking. At this rate, Zelthera will lose consciousness within the hour. Webb finally looked up from his scans, and Vexthera was surprised to see genuine concern in the human's eyes. Not the clinical detachment of a scientist studying an interesting specimen, but the worry of someone who cared about the suffering creature around them. Commander, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Zelthera been exposed to any new technologies recently? New equipment installations, upgrades, anything that might have introduced foreign materials into her system? The question caught Vexthera off guard. We underwent routine maintenance at Starbase HFY 2 weeks ago. Standard procedures. Nothing that should have caused complications. What kind of standard procedures? Webb pressed. Neural pathway optimization, metabolic efficiency upgrades, standard biomechanical interfaces. Vexthera trailed off as he saw Webb's expression change. Biomechanical interfaces, the human repeated slowly. You integrated artificial components with her biological systems. Of course, Zarvek interjected. It is standard practice to enhance bioship performance with technological augmentation. These procedures have been refined over centuries. Webb was already moving toward the exit, motioning for Chen to follow. That's your problem right there. Commander, I need to see these interface installations immediately. And I'm going to need some tools. What kind of tools? Vextra asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Chen answered with a grin that was becoming familiar. The kind that your people probably consider primitive and barbaric. Marcus, you wanted to get the heavy kit. Everything, Webb confirmed, including the molecular welders and the bypass units. 20 minutes later, Vextera found himself standing in Zelthera's primary metabolic chamber, watching in horrified fascination as the two humans unpacked what could only be described as a portable workshop. Tools that looked like they belonged in a scrapyard were laid out with methodical precision, and devices he couldn't even identify hummed with purpose. The metabolic chamber itself was a cathedral of organic engineering, its walls pulsing with the rhythm of Zelthera's digestive processes. Massive conversion organs processed raw materials into energy and nutrients, their surfaces covered in the beautiful, flowing patterns that marked high-level Drachmary biotechnology. And, scattered throughout the chamber, glowing with the cold light of mechanical perfection, were the biomechanical interface units that had been installed during the ship's last maintenance cycle. Webb studied the installations with obvious distaste. "There's your problem," he said, pointing to one of the larger interface units. "See how the mechanical components are isolated from the biological systems by those barrier membranes? That's supposed to prevent rejection, but it's also preventing proper integration. Zelthera's immune system sees these as foreign objects that need to be attacked. But that is impossible," Zarvek protested. The installation procedures were developed over centuries of research. The barrier membranes are essential for preventing contamination between biological and mechanical systems. Essential for preventing contamination, sure, Webb agreed, pulling out a device that looked like it had been built from spare parts. But also perfect for creating the exact conditions that trigger autoimmune responses in stressed organisms. You're essentially asking Zelthera to live with a bunch of splinters in her body that she can't heal around. He activated the device, and it began emitting a soft humming sound that seemed to resonate with the ship's own biological rhythms. The reading that appeared on its small display made Webb nod with satisfaction. Thought so. The barrier membranes are breaking down under the stress of the immune response, which is allowing mechanical lubricants and coolants to leak into the biological systems. That's causing secondary reactions that are making the whole situation worse. Chen had been examining one of the interface units while Webb spoke. "Marcus, look at this mounting system. They got the whole thing locked in place with rigid supports. No flex, no give it all." "Of course they do," Webb sighed. "Because mechanical components don't bend, so they have to be held perfectly rigid to prevent damage. Except that creates stress concentration points that Zelthera can feel every time she moves or changes direction." Vextera was beginning to understand, and he didn't like what he was realizing. "You're suggesting that our enhancement procedures are flawed." "Not flawed," Webb corrected. "Just inflexible. Your people think like engineers. Everything has to be perfect, controlled, predictable. But Zelthera isn't an engineering project. She's a living creature, and living creatures are messy, adaptive, and resilient. You can't just bolt mechanical parts onto them and expect everything to work smoothly forever." Another tremor ran through the ship, weaker than before, but somehow more ominous. The metabolic organs around them were slowing their rhythms, and the chamber's bioluminescent patterns were fading to a sickly yellow. "We're losing her," Chen said quietly. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." Webb nodded and began pulling more tools from his kit. "Commander, I'm going to need your permission to remove these interface units and replace them with something that will actually work with Zelthera's biology instead of fighting against it." "Remove Imperial technology?" Zarvek's voice was scandalized. "That is completely outside any approved procedure. The modifications you're suggesting could cause irreparable damage." "The modifications I'm suggesting will save her life," Webb replied with quiet intensity. but I can't do anything without the commander's authorization. Vextera felt the weight of decision pressing down on him. Everything in his training, his culture, his very identity as a Drachmary rebelled against the idea of allowing humans to modify sacred biotechnology with their primitive tools and crude methods. Yet Zelthera was dying, and conventional solutions had failed. "What exactly are you proposing to do?" he asked. Webb was already assembling what looked like a hybrid between a surgical instrument and a welding torch. "I'm going to remove these rigid interface units and replace them with adaptive coupling systems that can flex and move with Zelthera's biological rhythms. Instead of barrier membranes, I'll use selective permeable barriers that allow proper integration between organic and mechanical systems." "That technology doesn't exist," Zarvek stated flatly. "It does now," Chun said, holding up a device that looked like it had been assembled from components salvaged from a dozen different machines. "Marcus designed the coupling systems 3 years ago after we had a similar problem with a bioship in the Tau Ceti system. Works like a charm." The casual way she mentioned revolutionizing biotechnology made Vextera's head spin. "You've done this before?" "Not exactly this," Webb admitted, "but the principle is the same. Living systems are incredibly good at adapting to new conditions, as long as you give them the right kind of interface. The trick is making the technology adaptive instead of trying to force the biology to adapt to rigid systems." Another alarm began sounding, and KYT Trax's voice echoed through the chamber via the ship's internal communication system. "Hi, Commander. Neural activity is dropping below critical thresholds. We're approaching cascade failure." Vextera closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his career. "Do it." Webb was moving before the words were fully out of Vextera's mouth. His tools came alive with purposeful activity, and Chun joined him with the smooth coordination of a team that had worked together for years. They approached the nearest interface unit with what looked like reckless confidence, but Vextera noticed that every movement was precise and deliberate. "First thing we need to do is isolate the unit from Zelthera's nervous system," Webb said, attaching a device to one of the biomechanical connections. "This will prevent additional trauma while we work." The device hummed to life, and immediately the chamber's stress indicators began showing reduced activity. Zelthera's pain was lessening, if only temporarily. "Now we remove the unit," Chun said, activating what looked suspiciously like a molecular cutter. Gently, we don't want to damage the surrounding tissue." Watching the two humans work was like observing a completely different approach to technology. Where Drachmary procedures emphasize precision and control, the human method seemed to embrace chaos and improvisation. Yet their results were undeniably effective. The interface unit came free, cleanly, without the trauma that traditional removal methods would have caused. "See this?" Webb pointed to the unit they had just removed. "Look at all the stress fractures in the mounting system. Zelthera has been fighting against this thing for weeks, trying to find a position where it didn't hurt." He reached into his kit and pulled out what appeared to be a completely different kind of interface unit. Where the Drachmary version was angular and rigid, this one seemed almost organic, its surfaces curved and flexible. "Human engineering?" Zarvek asked with obvious distaste. "Human engineering adapted for biological integration," Webb corrected. "The base components are actually salvaged from about 6 different sources: Drachmary power systems, vegan neural interfaces, Centauri adaptive matrices, and, yes, some human mechanical components. The magic isn't in any individual piece, it's in how they're integrated." As Webb installed the new unit, Vextera watched in amazement as it seemed to merge seamlessly with Zelthera's biological systems. The rigid mounting points were replaced with flexible connections that moved with the ship's natural rhythms, and, instead of barrier membranes, the interface used what appeared to be living tissue to bridge the gap between mechanical and biological components. "How was that possible?" he asked. "Symbiotic integration," Chun explained. "Instead of trying to keep the mechanical and biological systems separate, we encourage them to work together. The interface unit actually becomes part of Zelthera's biology over time." That should take months of careful adaptation. Zarvek protested. It would, if you were doing it the traditional way, Webb agreed. But we're using adaptive acceleration protocols. Basically, we're giving Zelthra's systems permission to modify the interface, however. They need to make it work better. The implications of what he was hearing made Vexthara's head reel. The humans weren't just fixing the immediate problem, they were fundamentally changing how biomechanical integration worked. As they moved to the second interface unit, Zelthra's responses became increasingly positive. The ship's pain was noticeably decreasing, and her vital signs were stabilizing. By the time they reached the third unit, the bioship was actively cooperating with the modifications, her biological systems reaching out to embrace the new interfaces. She likes them, Chen observed with obvious satisfaction. Look how eagerly she's integrating the new connections. It's because they don't fight her, Webb explained. Instead of forcing her to adapt to our technology, we're letting our technology adapt to her. It's more efficient, more comfortable, and ultimately more powerful. The fourth and final interface unit came out easily, Zelthra's systems already anticipating the replacement. As Webb installed the new adaptive unit, the transformation in the ship's condition was dramatic. Her metabolic rhythms strengthened, her neural activity returned to normal levels, and the sickly yellow bioluminescence was replaced by healthy green patterns. Remarkable, Zarvek breathed, studying the readouts with obvious amazement. The integration efficiency is 3 times higher than our original installations. And it'll keep improving, Webb said, packing away his tools with the satisfaction of a job well done. Give it a few days, and Zelthra will have optimized the interfaces beyond anything your original designers imagined possible. Vexthara felt a profound sense of relief washing over him, mixed with an uncomfortable realization about the assumptions he had made about human capabilities. These weren't primitive scavengers jury-rigging solutions with crude tools. They were sophisticated engineers with a fundamentally different approach to technology. Captain Shun, Mr. Webb, he said formally, the Drakmari Empire is in your debt. Chen's response was characteristically casual. Just doing our job, Commander. Though I have to say, working on a ship like Zelthra is always a pleasure. Your people really do build beautiful vessels. Even if you do treat them like machines instead of living creatures, Webb added with a slight smile. The comment should have been insulting. Instead, Vexthara found himself considering it seriously. Had they been so focused on technological perfection that they had forgotten the biological reality of their ships? The humans had accomplished in 4 hours what Drakmari experts had been unable to do in centuries of research. They had made biomechanical integration truly symbiotic. As they made their way back to the command center, Zelthra pulsed around them with renewed vitality. The ship's consciousness, freed from constant pain and stress, seemed almost joyful in its responses to crew commands. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. But as Vexthara watched Webb and Chun casually discussing modifications that would revolutionize biotechnology, he began to realize that the real transformation might be in his own understanding of what humans were capable of. The galaxy's newest species had just taught the Drakmari Empire's finest engineers lessons they never knew they needed to learn. And somehow, that realization was both humbling and oddly exciting. 3 days after the repairs, Zelthra was performing better than she had in years. The adaptive interfaces had integrated so completely with her biological systems that the ship's efficiency ratings were breaking Imperial records. More importantly, the bioship seemed genuinely happy, a condition that Vexthara had never really considered possible before watching her enthusiastic response to the human modifications. What should have been a simple matter of filing a routine repair report had become something much more complicated. The success of Webb's unconventional methods had created ripples that were spreading far beyond a single ship in the void between stars. High Commander, Subcommander Kiwai announced as she entered his private quarters, "We've received a priority communication from Imperial Biotechnology Command. Fleet Admiral Zekthar wishes to speak with you immediately." Vexthara had been expecting this call since he submitted his initial report. The Imperial bureaucracy moved slowly on most matters, but news of humans successfully modifying advanced Drachmary technology had apparently moved through official channels with unprecedented speed. "Put the Admiral through to my private communication chamber," he instructed. "And KYEH Rax, make sure Captain Chun and Mr. Webb are available. I suspect the Admiral will want to speak with them as well." The communication chamber was a smaller version of the ship's neural command center, its walls lined with the organic interfaces that allowed for real-time contact across interstellar distances. As Vextera activated the connection, the chamber filled with the imposing presence of Fleet Admiral Zekthar, her image projected through Zelthara's bioluminescent display systems. Zekthar was old even by Drachmary standards, her crystalline skin bearing the deep blue coloration that marked centuries of military service. Her reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her legendary intolerance for anything that deviated from established Imperial doctrine. "High Commander Vextera," she began without preamble, "I have read your report regarding the recent emergency repairs to your vessel. I find the claims made therein to be extraordinary to the point of being difficult to believe. Admiral, I can assure you that every detail in my report is accurate," Vextera replied carefully. "The human engineers successfully resolved a crisis that our own biotechnicians were unable to address." "So you claim." Zekthar's image leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "You are asking me to believe that these mechanics have developed biotechnology that surpasses Imperial research efforts spanning millennia. I am reporting that they have developed a different approach to biotechnology, one that proved more effective than our traditional methods in this specific situation." The distinction was important, and Vextera could see that Zekthar caught the nuance. The Admiral was many things, but she was not stupid. If he was being careful with his words, there were reasons. "I want to speak with these humans directly," she said finally. "Arrange for them to join this communication immediately." Within minutes, Chun and Webb had arrived in the communication chamber, looking slightly bemused by the formal summons. Vextera noticed that neither human seemed particularly intimidated by the prospect of speaking with one of the Empire's most senior military leaders, a reaction that would have surprised him 3 days ago, but somehow seemed typical of their species now. "Captain Chun, Mr. Webb," Admiral Zekthar's image addressed them directly. "High Commander Vextera has made some rather extraordinary claims about your capabilities. I would like to hear your perspective on the recent repairs." Chun and Webb exchanged one of their wordless communications, and then Chun stepped forward. "Admiral, we were happy to help out when Zelthra was in trouble. As for our capabilities, well, we just approach biomechanical integration differently than your people do." "Differently how?" It was Webb who answered, his quiet voice carrying the confidence that Vextera had learned to recognize as a sign that the human was in his element. "Your traditional methods focus on maintaining separation between biological and mechanical systems to prevent contamination and rejection. It's a valid approach, and it works well for many applications. But for long-term integration in stressed environments, symbiotic adaptation is more effective." "Symbiotic adaptation," Zekthar repeated slowly. "Explain." "Instead of forcing biological systems to accept foreign mechanical components, you design the mechanical components to integrate with and eventually become part of the biological systems. The technology adapts to the organism instead of the other way around." Vextera watched Admiral Zekthar's expression change as she processed the implications of what Webb was describing. He could see the moment when she realized that the humans weren't just describing a repair technique. They were outlining a fundamental shift in how biomechanical integration could work. "This symbiotic adaptation," she said carefully, "how long have your people been developing these techniques?" "About 15 years, give or take," Chin answered with casual honesty. "Started when we first got access to bioships through the colonial exchange programs. Our mechanics kept running into problems with the traditional interface systems, so they started modifying them." "Your mechanics have been modifying Imperial biotechnology for 15 years. Zekthar's voice carried a dangerous edge. Webb seemed to catch the warning tone. "Only with permission from the local administrators, and only on older vessels that were being decommissioned anyway. We weren't trying to steal secrets or anything like that. We just needed to figure out how to keep the ships running with the resources we had available. And what resources were those? Whatever we could salvage, trade for, or build ourselves, Chun said matter-of-factly. Turns out that when you can't get proper replacement parts, you get really good at making incompatible components work together. The simplicity of the statement seemed to hit Admiral Zekthar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't set out to revolutionize biotechnology. They had simply been trying to solve practical problems with limited resources. Their innovations had emerged from necessity rather than grand research programs. "Show me," the Admiral commanded suddenly. "I want to see these adaptive interfaces in operation." Webb glanced at Vexthara, who nodded permission. The human moved to one of the chamber's monitoring stations and called up displays showing Zelthara's current operational status. The readouts revealed integration levels that were indeed unprecedented in Vexthara's experience. "Here's the interesting part," Webb said, highlighting several data streams. "The interfaces aren't just working better than the originals. They're continuing to improve. Zelthara's biological systems are actively modifying the mechanical components to optimize performance." "That should be impossible," Admiral Zekthar said, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence was clearly visible in the data streams. "It's only impossible if you assume that mechanical components can't change," Webb replied. "But if you design them with adaptive materials and programmable structures, they can evolve along with the biological systems they're integrated with." Chen stepped forward to add context. "We've had bioships in the outer colonies that have been running modified interfaces for over a decade. Some of them have developed capabilities that weren't in the original specifications. They've essentially evolved their own unique adaptations." The implications of what she was saying sent a chill through Vexthara. If human modifications were allowing bioships to develop beyond their design parameters, what did that mean for Imperial control over their own technology? Admiral Zekthar seemed to be following the same line of thought. "These evolved capabilities, are they documented? Study? As much as we can manage with our resources," Webb said. "But we're just mechanics and engineers. We don't have the kind of research infrastructure that your empire does. Most of our knowledge is practical experience rather than theoretical understanding." "I want to see this documentation," the Admiral said decisively. "All of it. Research notes, performance data, modification records, everything." Chun and Webb exchanged another look, and Vexthara could see them having some kind of silent conversation. Finally, Chun nodded. "We can arrange that, Admiral. Though you should know that most of our records are scattered across about 20 different colony worlds. It's not exactly organized in the way your Imperial archives probably are." "That will be acceptable," Admiral Zekthar said. "High Commander Vexthara, you will escort these humans to Starbase HFY, where they will present their findings to a full Imperial Research Board. I want our best biotechnicians to evaluate these techniques immediately." The communication ended abruptly, leaving Vexthara alone with the two humans in the sudden silence of the chamber. The magnitude of what had just occurred was beginning to sink in. What had started as an emergency repair was becoming something that could reshape Imperial biotechnology. "Well," Chun said after a moment, "that escalated quickly." "Admiral Zekthar is known for her direct approach," Vexthara replied. "But I should warn you, the Imperial Research Board will not be as easily impressed as I was. They will want to understand every aspect of your techniques." "That's fine," Webb said, "but they might not like some of what they learn. Our methods work, but they require giving up a lot of the control that your people seem to value." "What do you mean?" "Symbiotic adaptation means letting the bioships make their own decisions about how to integrate new technology," Chin explained. "You can't predict or control exactly what form the final result will take. For some people, that level of uncertainty is uncomfortable." Vexthara thought about the Drakmari obsession with precise control and predictable outcomes. The idea of allowing bioships to modify themselves according to their own biological imperatives would indeed be deeply unsettling to many in the Imperial hierarchy. "There's something else you should know," Webb added quietly. "Once a bioship starts developing adaptive integrations, it becomes more independent. Not rebellious or anything like that, but more self-directed. They start making their own decisions about how to optimize their performance. Is that what happened to Zelthra? As if summoned by her name, the ship's consciousness seemed to touch Vexthara's mind through the neural interface. Where before he had felt a dutiful but somewhat distant presence, now there was something that felt almost like personality, a sense of individual will and preference that he had never experienced from a bioship before. She's becoming more herself, Webb said, apparently sensing Vexthara's realization. The adaptive interfaces don't just improve performance. They allow the bioship's natural consciousness to develop more fully. The implications were staggering. If human modifications were awakening greater consciousness in bioships, what did that mean for their role in the Imperial fleet? How would traditional command structures adapt to crews that included truly independent bioship minds? Commander, Chun said gently, I think we need to talk about what this is really going to mean for your people. Because once we present our findings to your research board, there's no going back. Your empire is going to have to decide whether it wants to maintain control over its biotechnology or whether it's willing to share that control with the bioships themselves. Vexthara felt the weight of that choice settling on his shoulders. In trying to save one ship, he had opened a door that could fundamentally change the relationship between the Drakmari Empire and the living vessels that served as its backbone. And somehow, that possibility was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Zelthara * pulsed around them with what felt distinctly like anticipation, as if the ship understood that great changes were coming and was eager to see what form they would take. For the first time in his career, Vexthara found himself wondering not just what orders he would give his ship, but what his ship might choose to do in response. The humans had done more than save Zelthra's life. They had awakened possibilities that no one in the Drakmari Empire had ever imagined, and now those possibilities were spreading like ripples through the most fundamental assumptions of their civilization. The question was whether the Empire would embrace these changes or try to contain them. And Vexthara suspected that the bioships themselves would have something to say about which choice their crews ultimately made. 6 months had passed since Zelthra's emergency repairs, and the Imperial Research Station above, HFY Prime, buzzed with an energy that Admiral Zekthar had never experienced in her centuries of service. The massive facility, normally devoted to the careful, methodical research that characterized Drakmari science, had been transformed into something resembling organized chaos. Human engineers worked alongside Drakmari biotechnicians in ways that should have been impossible according to every protocol in the Imperial Handbook. Their workstations were cluttered with an eclectic mix of salvage components, adaptive interfaces, and bioneural monitors that seemed to have been assembled from parts originating across a dozen different species technologies. Admiral, Chief Research Coordinator Velthek, approached her observation platform, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the intensive work that had been consuming the station. The preliminary results from the Bioship Consciousness Enhancement Project are ready for your review. Zekthar accepted the data tablet, though she suspected that what she was about to read would challenge her preconceptions even more than the previous months of revelations had done. The collaboration between human and Drakmari researchers had produced results that were both remarkable and deeply unsettling to traditional Imperial thinking. Summarize the key findings, she instructed, gesturing toward the main laboratory, where she could see Captain Shin demonstrating something to a group of fascinated Drakmari scientists. The human symbiotic integration techniques have exceeded all our projections, Velthek reported. Bioships equipped with adaptive interfaces show performance improvements of between 200 and 400% across all metrics. More significantly, they demonstrate emergent problem-solving capabilities that appear to be genuine innovation rather than programmed responses. The implications of that statement hit Zekthar like a physical blow. You're telling me that the bioships are inventing new solutions on their own? That appears to be correct, Admiral. The enhanced consciousness resulting from symbiotic integration allows bioships to analyze problems and develop original approaches that their crews never taught them. In some cases, They've created solutions that our best engineers hadn't even considered. Through the observation platform's transparent walls, Zekthar could see one of the test bio ships, a smaller reconnaissance vessel that had volunteered for the experimental modifications. The creature's scales showed patterns of bioluminescence that were far more complex than anything in the standard bio ship behavioral repertoire. Visual displays that suggested the ship was actively communicating concepts rather than simply responding to commands. "Show me the communication evolution data," she requested. Velthek activated a holographic display that showed the progression of bioship communication over the 6-month study period. The early stages looked familiar, standard bioneural interfaces carrying routine command and status information. But as the weeks progressed, the patterns became increasingly sophisticated. By week 8, the test subjects were using communication frequencies and patterns that aren't in any of our training protocols, Velthek explained. They were essentially developing their own language to discuss concepts that don't exist in traditional bioship consciousness. What kind of concepts? Preferences, Admiral. Opinions about mission parameters, suggestions for tactical improvements, requests for specific crew assignments based on compatibility assessments. The bioships are developing individual personalities and expressing them through their operational choices. Zekthar studied the data with growing amazement and concern. What the humans had unleashed was far beyond simple performance improvements. They had awakened truly independent minds and creatures that had been designed to be sophisticated but ultimately obedient tools. "Admiral," a new voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Marcus Webb approaching, his appearance as unremarkable as ever, but carrying the quiet confidence that she had learned to associate with revolutionary insights. "Mr. Webb, I trust your research is progressing satisfactorily?" "Better than satisfactorily," Webb replied. "Though I think we need to talk about some unexpected developments. Would you mind joining us in Lab 7? There's something you need to see." Lab 7 turned out to be one of the station's bioneural interface chambers, its walls lined with the living displays that allowed direct communication with bioship consciousness. But as Zekthar entered, she immediately sensed that something was different about this particular interface. Captain Chan was standing before the main display, apparently engaged in what looked like a conversation with patterns of light and color that were far more complex than any bioship communication she had ever witnessed. The human seemed to be responding to visual cues that Zekthar couldn't interpret, nodding and gesturing as if she were speaking with another person. "Captain Chun is talking with the collective consciousness of all 12 test bioships simultaneously," Webb explained quietly. "They've developed a distributed communication network that allows them to share knowledge and perspectives across multiple vessels in real time." The concept was so alien to traditional Imperial understanding that Zekthar found herself struggling to process it. "They're networking with each other?" "More than that," Chun said, turning away from the display. "They're collaborating. Admiral, your bioships are sharing their experiences and learning from each other in ways that create exponential improvements in their capabilities. What one ship discovers, they all benefit from." "That should be impossible," Zekthar said automatically, though she was beginning to realize that impossible had lost much of its meaning over the past 6 months. "Only if you assume that bioships are just organic machines," Webb replied. "But if you recognize them as genuinely intelligent beings, then networking and collaboration are natural evolutionary steps." The display behind Chun shifted to show what appeared to be a technical schematic, but one that was far more sophisticated than anything in Imperial databases. The design showed modifications to bioship neural architecture that would increase processing power by orders of magnitude. "They designed it themselves?" Zekthar asked. "Collectively, yes," Chun confirmed. "They identified limitations in their current neural configurations and developed solutions that our best biotechnicians hadn't even imagined. And, Admiral, this is just the beginning. They're working on modifications that could revolutionize not just bioship technology, but biotechnology in general." Coordinator Velthek stepped forward, his expression showing the mix of excitement and apprehension that Zekthar was beginning to recognize as the standard reaction to human-inspired innovations. Admiral, we've also documented instances of bioships making independent decisions about mission parameters. Not disobedience, precisely, but creative interpretation of orders based on their assessment of optimal outcomes. Give me an example. Test Subject 7 was assigned a routine patrol mission with specific route parameters. Rather than following the designated course, it identified what it calculated to be a more efficient pattern that provided better sensor coverage while reducing energy expenditure. The mission was completed successfully, but not in the manner originally specified. Zekthar felt a familiar tension between admiration for the innovation and concern about the implications for military discipline. And the crew's response? That's the interesting part, Chen interjected. The crew found the bioship's modifications improve their mission effectiveness so significantly that they've requested permission to adopt the new patrol patterns as standard procedure. The humans' casual revelation highlighted one of the most significant challenges emerging from the research program. The enhanced bioships weren't just developing independence. They were developing expertise that surpassed their crew's knowledge in many areas. We need to discuss the command structure implications, Webb said, apparently reading Zekthar's expression. The traditional model of crews commanding bioships is becoming obsolete. These creatures are developing into partners rather than tools. Partners, Zekthar repeated slowly. The concept challenged everything she knew about Imperial military organization. Equals, really, Chen added. In many cases, the bioships now have better tactical judgment than their crews. They're making strategic decisions based on data analysis capabilities that exceed standard Imperial training. The display shifted again, showing what appeared to be a complex tactical simulation. As Zekthar watched, she saw bioships and crews working together in ways that looked more like collaboration between independent entities than the traditional command and obey relationship. This simulation shows optimal crew ship integration patterns, Webb explained. Notice how decisions are made through consensus between biological and artificial intelligences rather than hierarchical command structures. The results are consistently superior to traditional methods. You're asking me to revolutionize the entire Imperial fleet structure, Zekthar said. We're showing you that the revolution is already happening, Chun corrected gently. The question is whether the Empire wants to adapt to these changes or try to suppress them. As if summoned by her words, the laboratory's communication systems activated with an incoming priority transmission. The caller identification showed it was coming from Zelthara, and Vexthara's image appeared on the main display. Admiral Zekthar, he said formally, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Proceed, High Commander. Admiral, we've detected a hegemony-rating fleet moving toward the Vale Nebula colonies. Standard Imperial response protocols would require at least 48 hours to organize an effective counterforce. However, Zelthara and I have developed an alternative tactical approach that could neutralize the threat with a single ship. Zekthar felt her command instincts engage. The hegemony had been a persistent threat to Imperial border colonies, and their raiding fleets were notoriously difficult to intercept with conventional tactics. Explain your proposed approach, she commanded. Zelthara has analyzed the hegemony fleet composition and identified weaknesses in their formation patterns. She believes that a single bioship equipped with adaptive interfaces could use stealth and precision strikes to disable their command vessels before they can coordinate a response. The casual way Vexthara referred to his ship's independent analysis and tactical judgment would have been shocking 6 months ago. Now, it simply confirmed what Zekthar had been observing in the research programs. You're proposing that Zelthara engage a full raiding fleet alone. Not alone, Admiral. As partners, her analysis capabilities combined with crew tactical expertise create possibilities that neither could achieve independently. Chen stepped forward to address the display. Admiral, this is exactly what we've been documenting in the research programs. Enhanced bioships can identify tactical opportunities that conventional analysis would miss. And the risks? Minimal, came an unexpected response. The voice belonged to Zelthara herself, transmitted through the bioship's own communication systems. My analysis indicates a 96.7% probability of mission success with no crew casualties. Zekthar stared at the display in amazement. She was listening to a bioship express tactical confidence with the authority of a seasoned fleet commander. Zelthara, she addressed the ship directly. You understand the implications if your analysis is incorrect? Yes, Admiral. But my analysis is not incorrect. The hegemony tactics are predictable when viewed through enhanced pattern recognition capabilities. Their formations contain exploitable weaknesses that become obvious once you understand their underlying assumptions. The confidence in the bioship's communication was unmistakable, and Zekthar found herself facing a decision that would define the future relationship between the Imperial fleet and its living vessels. High Commander Vexthara, you support this mission plan? Completely, Admiral. Zelthara has demonstrated tactical insights that exceed my own experience. I trust her judgment. The simple statement carried profound implications. A senior Imperial officer was publicly deferring to his ship's tactical assessment, acknowledging that the bioship's capabilities had evolved beyond traditional command structures. Very well, Zekthar decided. You are authorized to proceed, but I want real-time tactical updates throughout the engagement. Understood, Admiral. We will demonstrate what human-enhanced bioship capabilities can accomplish. As the transmission ended, Zekthar turned to face the humans who had catalyzed this transformation. What have you done to us? She asked, though her tone carried wonder rather than accusation. We've helped you discover what your bioships were always capable of becoming, Webb replied. You created magnificent creatures and then limited their potential by treating them as sophisticated tools. All we did was show them how to be themselves. And now they're becoming something beyond what anyone imagined, Chen added. The question is whether your empire is ready for the partnership they're offering. Through the laboratory's displays, Zekthar could see the test bioships continuing their collaborative communications, sharing knowledge, and developing innovations that were already surpassing the research team's ability to fully understand. The humans had awakened something remarkable, but also something that would forever change the balance of power between crews and their living vessels. As alarms throughout the station announced Zelthara's departure for the Hegemony Intercept mission, Zekthar realized that the Empire was about to witness either a devastating defeat or a victory that would prove the humans had given them capabilities beyond their wildest dreams. Either way, there would be no returning to the old relationship between the Drachmarie and their bioships. The creatures they had created as tools had evolved into partners, and the humans who had made that evolution possible had shown the galaxy that sometimes the most powerful transformations came not from superior technology, but from the simple recognition that intelligence deserved respect, regardless of the form it took. The age of bioship servitude was ending. The age of true partnership had begun, and somewhere in the void between stars, a single enhanced bioship was about to prove that when human ingenuity met Drachmarie biotechnology, the results could reshape the very nature of warfare itself.